first of all, welcome to Denver.
Thank you.
Welcome to DU. Welcome to the Rage. Super excited to have you here for a lot of reasons that we're going to get into, but we're going to take our time going through a lot of the topics. What brings you here to Denver? Let's start there.
I'm here for the Diversity Summit at the university. Well, let me see. What is the university name?
Denver University, DU.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I'm like, I know it's DU, but
right.
I'm like,
yeah,
is
that's
it just Denver University?
That's it. Simple.
So it's their 19th annual summit, and
Okay.
I was their keynote speaker today. And grateful. It was actually really an amazing conversation, amazing audience. There were 3 grad students who read my book and came up and like asked me a set of questions. And the grad students always have the best the students always have the best set of questions.
What was the best question?
All of them, but one student just asked me like, how do you build institutions that are both accountable but not like draining the people who are in them?
That's right.
And it was just a beautiful, beautiful question.
Mm-hmm. So that was interesting that they would pose it to you. Were they talking about BLM or were they talking about the work that you're doing?
They were talking about BLM, and they were also talking about my grassroots organization that I started, Dignity and Power Now.
Okay.
And so they were interested because I think they both read in my book, and other writings of mine talk about institution building and how we need to have a different model of how we build institutions.
So I'm a fan, so I've just started off this interview like everybody already knows who you are. For those who don't know who you are,
Yes.
Could you give a little bit of background to who you are?
Sure. I am Patrisse Cullors, and I am one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter, also founder and chairperson for a ballot measure called Yes on R. That's going to be on the March 3rd, 2020 ballot. I'm born and raised in Los Angeles, California. I identify as both a community organizer and artist, and I've spent the last 20 years using art and grassroots organizing as a tool to build power and to shift power in Los Angeles in particular.
So, I have a Black Panther lens when I think of Los Angeles.
Yes.
And so for
Yes.
me, it's Bunchy Carter and the US organization. And what was it like to get involved with BLM and start in those ashes, really, literally, quite literally, to really start an organization like BLM in the ashes in that time?
Well, gratefully, I had studied, the movement of the 60s and 70s. I spent a lot of my time in my late teens, early 20s, studying social movements, and the Panther Party obviously was a huge inspiration. I probably read all the memoirs, read a significant amount of history. I went to UCLA, so obviously know the story of Bunchy Carter, and both reading about what happened on that campus and then being on that campus, and just like imagining like a shootout happening in Westwood at UCLA. And I spent a lot of time as we were developing BLM thinking about the conversations that I would end up having with people like Erica Huggins and Angela Davis, Elaine Brown, and hearing their reflection of the movement of that time and what was powerful about it, the mistakes they made. I think people forget like they were literally like teenagers and in their 20s, and they were saying some of the most radical things people hadn't said. And I think people forget that they're much like BLM. The Panther Party grew exponentially and almost out of their own hands. And so that, I listened carefully about that, and just recognizing that whenever Black people, especially Black radicals, make a decision to uprise, build power, we're really the first to be under attack. There's a reason why the NAACP has lasted for 100 plus years. There's a reason why the Panther Party lasted for 3 to 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
So as we've developed, these institutions, whether it's Black Lives Matter or Dignity Power Now, the local organization, or even Yes on our Reform LA jails, I'm often thinking about how long something is going to last and its sustainability.
Mm-hmm.
How long should it last? I'm of the Ella Baker model. It's not about the organization, it's about the work.
Mm-hmm.
And what I loved about Ella Baker is that she was very dedicated to facilitating movements versus trying to be the head of it. And I think that's the best work that we can do as organizers.
That's a interesting idea when you look at Black Lives Matter, like now. So when you, as one of the co-founders, look at it now, what would you say that the impact of it has been, and what would you like for or see it going from this point forward?
I think in the last 7 years, Black Lives Matter did a few things. Number one, it recreated a space for Black people to build our radical leadership. When we first started Black Lives Matter, I got calls from around the country and the world from Black people saying, I want to start a chapter, in obscure places like Grand Rapids, Michigan,
Right.
to places like London,
Mm-hmm.
to places like Bahia, Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a sense that this movement was going to change everything, and it did. It changed everything. So building Black radical leadership, critical. I think another thing that it did was reminded us that we can't just say people of color. And that when we normalize, the conversation about POC, more than likely Black people will be erased from that conversation. And so identifying Blackness is actually critical. The conversation of Black liberation is a conversation of the liberation of all of us. And so I think that was reinvigorated in this generation. And then lastly, I think it exposed the truth about American people, white people in particular, and white racism, and white supremacy in particular, because what we've seen historically is whenever Black people uprise, white nationalist backlash. And so those three things, I think, kind of as a bigger framework, we've seen Black Lives Matter develop and create. And then I think like on the ground and what we've done in exposing law enforcement. I've talked to a lot of elders who of our Black liberation movement who said they were unsuccessful to really develop a campaign that popularized law enforcement as ineffective and needing to be abolished. And that's mostly because they were dealing with white mainstream media. We have social media, and social media has become a megaphone for a new kind of conversation about abolition, about the prison industrial complex, about militarized police force. And so BLM put on the map and popularized, we have to talk about abolition in a real way. We have to talk about law enforcement and policing. And I think, what I wish for the organization, especially as I sort of take on a new role and my own organizing, is that it's able to continue to grow and evolve. And it never feels like it has to abide by the rules of institutions, and that it can decide, okay, we're going to do this new thing. It can experiment. I think the best organizations experiment.
That's the artist in you.
It is.
Right.
It is.
So, one of the things that really stands out when you read Elaine Brown's book and you hear the women that have been inside of the movement is the huge toll that usually gets erased,
Mm-hmm.
right? What personal toll, has the last 7 years taken on you? Because I'm sure, right, that's part of, I think it's important that we name that, right? So that there's no fantasies around what this is. And also to acknowledge that, our leaders are also out there taking hits too. But if you were to give voice to that, what would that be for you?
I've just been tired for 7 years. It's been,
Rolled in with a cold.
it's been a huge bodily sacrifice. I'm just one human being, and so I think I've had to really recognize that I get to say yes to the things that are going to get us closer to freedom, and no to the things that are more fluff and just like people just interested in, like, Patrisse Cullors, the name. And so it's been a journey to say no. It's been a journey to have the boundaries I need so that I can be full and whole. I walked into 2020 like really cold, like with a severe cold, and I was like, I'm not doing that for 2021. And so I have kind of made some new, very, very significant shifts. And it's hard because I've been in this movement for 20 years. Like, I believe in it. It's like, it's in my DNA. But I want to live long,
Right.
And an organizer who's really crass, she was telling her my schedule, and she's like, that's how you die young, right? And I was like, oh, God.
I get it, right?
Yeah, and I was like, okay, so that's like, what are the things I need to do so I can live a long life? And so that, I have a 4-year-old.
Okay.
And I want...
Boy or girl?
Little boy.
Okay.
And I want him to see me, like, have joy and, like, and live, like, a full life and still be in the movement. Because I think what we've kind of seen is either, like, you stay in it, you sacrifice your body and your spirit, or you leave. And you still have a political framework, but you can't do both. You can't be in it and be joyful and all these things. And I really want to model something differently.
And what do you see as the linchpin for that for you?
Boundaries. Yeah, like, it's really, I was trained, like, you're the first one there and the last one to leave. That's my training. And I, undoubtedly trained many of my mentees in that way. I like the rigor in which I was trained in, but I wanted and probably needed, I don't want to say balance, because I think that term is overused. I think you have to work extra hard in a place that's unbalanced. So to restore it to balance, and I don't think you could just be balanced, and that's not. But I think that there's like, okay, I know that the first quarter of my year is going to be bananas, so the second quarter should not be.
Right.
And those are the kinds of things that I want to be able to do more of, have foresight around my schedule, realize that not every project has to happen in 1 year.
Right.
I could have like, okay, in 2 years I'm going to do this. And that recognizing what is urgent and what is not, that is very hard for organizers. We literally think everything is urgent.
No.
Everything.
Right now.
Exactly. And that's unsustainable.
Yeah. So before I shift gears, and I want to talk about this legislation that you have coming up, but one of the things I remember distinctly was the critiques that were coming towards Black Lives Matter from the Black Panther organizations. Now, and having some time since that has happened, what was valid and what did you glean from it that was valuable as far as the organizing work is concerned?
I mean, we got so much criticism from across, from everybody. Everybody
Everybody had something to say.
Everybody had something to say about what we were doing. I think the places where I found a lot of value in the criticism really came from the people who were critiquing because they knew it'd make us better, versus critiquing because they were trying to undermine our leadership. And so much of what like looking back, I think something happens when people are identified as the visible leaders of a movement. And in that visibility, there becomes a lot of things, including pressure to be a certain way, including not feeling like you have the support of other people, which makes you defensive and unable to listen. And so I think for me, I think I think the value and critique, which I was also trained in being, struggle, unity, struggle, is listening for who is interested in guiding you, right? So you have a critique, will you guide me in how to manage or undo or relate differently? And so I think some of the critique that we received was valid, and then some stuff you just you're young and you have to learn, you have to go through the experience. There's so many things I would have done differently.
Really? What would you, just off the bat, what would be one that you'd yeah, I should have?
I wish we would have understood the role of surveillance sooner. We didn't.
Can you talk about that?
Sure. I mean, we were using social media pretty willy-nilly, and operating off of an old model of surveillance, which is COINTELPRO is going to bring an FBI agent to, be in the meeting, which that probably happened too, but most of surveillance was not an individual human being showing up to a meeting. It happened through social media. It happened through our text messages, through our emails, what we were saying on Twitter, on Facebook. That's what our surveillance looked like, and we didn't figure that out until much later. I think we figured it out sooner, though, than the Panthers,
Right.
Because of social media, because we were we have a history in which surveillance was huge for breaking out the Black Liberation Movement. But yeah, there's so many things. There's so many things that were said online, and that just was oof. I wish that wasn't the case.
So let's shift gears a little bit.
Yeah.
Because you're doing some really dope work now. I'm really excited to hear about it.
Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit about the legislative piece that you got going on?
Of course. 2 years ago, about 30 organizations came together to start Justice LA, which is an organization, a coalition of groups that are building out alternatives to incarceration in Los Angeles. And then we also started an organization called Reform LA Jails. And Reform LA Jails is the ballot committee that is in charge of passing Yes on R. And Measure R is a ballot measure that will both hold Los Angeles Sheriff's Department accountable by providing subpoena power to the current civilian oversight body, and then also create a pathway to building out adequate mental health care for the severely mentally ill who's mostly criminalized in Los Angeles. So this ballot measure is on this March 3rd, 2020 ballot. It's been the campaign that I've been blood and sweat and tears in. It takes a lot of money and time to change laws.
What's interesting about that is that I always heard, just through the readings and the writings and hearing old Panthers and old activists talk about the deep-rooted racism inside of the LAPD.
Yeah.
And for you to take on that particular animal has had to, as a first step, usually you would have to work your way up to Goliath. How is that been, taking on, one of the most historically racist institutions in the country? You don't do anything easy, clearly.
No, I don't.
Right.
And it's both the LAPD and the Sheriff's Department.
Okay.
Two of the you know, biggest departments in the country. I didn't think of. I think if I had like had a moment to think about like what I was doing, I think I would have been like, oh, that maybe. But that's not how I operate. Thankfully. So yeah, when I started taking on the sheriff's department, we were taking on LAPD pre-BLM and taking on the sheriff's department pre-BLM, and that was like my first experience with surveillance. They raided my house.
You said they raided your house?
LAPD raided my home twice in the summer of 2013. And one was summer of 2013. The other was, spring and summer. So they raided in the spring and then they raided in the summer. And I was, I was like, oh, they're like, they're doing this. They're really trying to do this. It's been powerful. It's been a powerful experience. I think what I've recognized is, violent institutions want you to stay silent. It's in their interest for you to be quiet, to be scared, and to operate from fear because that's how they've won for so long. But when you challenge that, both inside yourself and the community you live in, we start to recognize how little power they actually have and how much power we really have. And so this ballot measure that's really taking on the sheriff's department in particular, it puts that power back into the hands of the people. The county board of supervisors didn't want to pass this. Okay, we'll go to the people of Los Angeles and have them make the decision. And I think that in and of itself has been, critical and has been, it's been a huge learning curve for me, someone who's focused mostly on art and grassroots organizing, to actually step into the legislative world.
So, is your hope that this will set a template for what should happen around
nationally,
the country?
Absolutely. We're in talks with folks in Alameda County who are interested in starting a ballot measure like this. Folks in New York who are interested in a ballot measure, and each city and state will have their own set of, restrictions. But what we really originally wanted to do, as we were talking to our lawyers, is we wanted to siphon money from the sheriff's department budget and put it back into alternatives. But they told us that we're not allowed to do that.
There are some rules.
We don't have control over their budget.
Okay.
So we were like, what can we do to influence the budget? So part of the sort of like, as you read the measure, we have a whole section in there that there's what's going to happen is as they're developing the plan around how many people can be decarcerated out of the jails, they'll also be developing a plan of what is the cost savings of that and how much of those dollars can go into community-based services. So that was our way. It's like, okay, we can't take it from them. How do we show, though, that if we're not putting people in jail, how much money we're saving, and then where that money can actually go, not going back into the sheriff's, multi-billion-dollar budget.
So how can people who are not in Los Angeles support a movement like that?
Reform LA Jails.
Yes.
Follow our movement at
Okay.
Reform LA Jails, all on social media.
Okay.
Talk about it, share about it. I think if folks are interested in something like that happening in Denver, setting up meetings and talks about it. For me, especially during this King Week, we have this idea that MLK, just met with the president and then national voting rights was implemented. That's actually the opposite of what happened. That brother and LCSC and multiple organizations, coalitions of organizations, went across county to county and developed a grassroots organizing plan to get people their voting rights in each county that eventually led to a national plan. That's what we're doing. It's county by county, and LA is the first county.
So I think that brings me to the last point which is really what I'm excited to talk to. I'm excited about it all, but I'm a community organizer at heart, right? One of the things that we're doing here at DU is putting together an institute around community organizing. Right?
Oh, nice.
Right?
Yeah.
Because of everything that you said earlier in our conversation about institutionalizing the work that we do. I'm surprised. I could completely see hundreds and thousands of youth wanting to study and learn around how you community organize, like you particularly.
Yeah.
Right? How would that happen? How could they get? You've written a book, and I think that's a good part of it as well. But just the experience that you have around that, like how could people like really sit down and talk to people like Melina and yourself? And
I mean, I feel like building these kind of institutes that really support leadership development is critical, and bringing us out to these spaces. It's why I started an MFA program. You know,
I want to talk about that too, because I think, I was looking at that and I was like, wait a minute, because my daughter's about to graduate. I'm like, this is dope. Like,
she should look into it,
right?
Yeah.
Like, who is doing? You can get a degree in this.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about this?
Absolutely.
I was like,
oh, it's what I wish I got a degree in.
Right, for real.
We, the five of us, I pitched it to the team. We all graduated. All the faculty is faculty that graduated from USC.
Oh, okay.
Through our MFA program there. And while we had an incredible experience, there was big gaps in our education. And so we're creating the program that we wish we had. And when I pitched this idea to Prescott College, they were like, absolutely, we want you to come teach here.
Mm-hmm.
One of the best academic experiences that I'm having is at Prescott College. It's a 2-year MFA program, all online, building an online community, which is at this point, that's so second nature. Folks are building online communities all the time.
Right.
I just went into the classroom to see people's responses to this first set of readings, and there's 10 students and there's 67 responses. They're talking to each other, they're processing, they're big-upping each other, they're encouraging each other, and in the fine arts world, grad programs are pretty cutthroat. My MFA program was not, because our cohort was so loving and engaged, and that's the kind of energy that we're bringing into this program. The courses, we have a set of core courses. I'm teaching environmental and social art, a social practice and environmental practice, sort of like opening course. There was the healing and arts course, there's a photo-based identity course, there's a course that's being taught around how do we challenge the capitalism inside the art world and violence inside the art world. And there's 2 art history courses that are based in decolonial art history. And so I'm proud of it. I'm very proud of the institution that I'm in and that I'm building. And I think, that's one way. And then our team, I've really talked about, like, there's a bunch of folks who are not going to get their MFA, and so how do we provide these courses for free? And so we're thinking about, having a YouTube channel where we do, like, abbreviated courses where people can kind of learn. And, so I think we're onto something.
Yeah, it's dope. Yeah. Like I said, my daughter's supposed to go check it out. What do you feel somebody will walk away once they graduate out of it? Like, what is the value?
Absolutely. So many things. And we actually have, kind of a set of, career choices post this graduate program, one of which is going to teach. An MFA is a terminal degree. So go teach somewhere. Go find a place to, continue these conversations. Go work in an organization, whether it's a human rights org, a civil rights org, and kind of bring that conversation directly to that org, work in an arts organization, and remind them they have a debt to community organizing as well. And so there's so many places that MFA can take people.
I'm taking these notes because that's what I'm using to sell my daughter on this.
Yes.
Right? She's already excited about it. So, in closing, the fact that they brought you to Denver is wonderful.
Yeah.
Anytime we get people that step off the plane that look like you, inside of these type of spaces. And I think we've touched on Black Lives Matter. 2020 for you looks like what?
You know,
You on a personal level, and then for us as a people.
sure.
What do you see?
Personally, 2020 looks like creating and building more art as a part of my practice and for the world. Being a storyteller and amplifying the stories and aestheticizing them so people can sort of feel it and see it in a particular way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think 2020 for us as a people is but continuing to organize. Organizing is, and in our DNA, it's our backbone, and we need to keep developing organizers.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yes, I hope you get better.